Meet Alex. Alex just wants a coffee. 2 streets apart, there are 2 coffee shops, same size cup, same kind of beans, same milk. One charges $2, the other charges $5. Alex stands there for a second, genuinely confused. How can the exact same product cost more than double, just a few hundred meters away? It feels random, like someone just picked a number. But it isn't random at all. Behind that $5 price tag is a quiet system: scarcity, competition, costs, and thousands of small decisions by people just like Alex, all working together, even though nobody sat down and planned it that way. And once you understand what's actually happening behind that price tag, you'll start seeing almost every price differently. So what field even explains this? Not the news headlines about interest rates or national unemployment. That's macroeconomics, the big picture. This is smaller and, honestly, more useful day to day. Microeconomics studies how individuals like Alex and businesses like those 2 coffee shops make decisions when they don't have unlimited resources. What to buy, what to sell, what price to charge. Multiply Alex's small decisions by millions of people making similar ones, and you get an entire market. Every one of those decisions traces back to one uncomfortable fact: there isn't enough of anything to give everyone everything they want. Economists have a word for that. Here's a question worth sitting with. Is coffee rare? Not really. It's grown on entire continents. So why does economics still call it scarce? Scarcity doesn't mean something is rare. It means the amount available is limited relative to how much people want. Alex doesn't have unlimited money and doesn't have unlimited time either. There's only so much of Alex's paycheck and only so many minutes in the coffee break. That's scarcity, not the coffee itself, but Alex's ability to have everything at once. Because resources are scarce, every choice forces a trade-off. Choosing coffee this morning means choosing not to spend that money or that time on something else. So what happens to whatever Alex didn't choose? Say Alex has $10 and 30 minutes. Alex could buy that $5 coffee and read for the rest of the break, or skip the coffee and put the money toward a streaming subscription instead. Whichever Alex picks, something else gets given up. Economists call the value of the next best alternative you give up your opportunity cost. Not everything you could have done, specifically the best option you didn't choose. If Alex buys the coffee, the opportunity cost isn't everything else in the world. It's that streaming subscription, the single best alternative that got left behind. Businesses make the exact same calculation on a much larger scale every time they decide what to produce with limited machines, staff, and time. If everything is limited, how do people decide what actually matters most to them? That's where value comes in. Alex doesn't only ask, which coffee is cheaper? Alex asks something closer to, is what I'm getting actually worth what I'm giving up? The satisfaction or benefit someone gets from consuming something is called utility. It's personal. Alex might get more satisfaction from a well-made $5 coffee than from a rushed $2 one, even though it costs more. That's why people don't always buy the cheapest option on the shelf. Utility connects straight back to opportunity cost. Alex is implicitly comparing, is this coffee worth more to me than the next best thing I could do with this money? Multiply that tiny comparison by millions of consumers, and you start to see why prices aren't set by sellers alone. Buyers are constantly voting with their choices. But why does Alex even react to a $5 price differently on some days than others? If the coffee shop runs a buy one, get one half price deal, Alex probably buys 2. If a new local tax raises the price of oat milk, the shop probably uses a little less of it, or raises prices slightly. Neither Alex nor the shop owner needs to think, I am now responding to an economic incentive. They just respond to changing rewards and costs. That's literally what an incentive is. Discounts, taxes, higher wages, penalties, subsidies, they all nudge behavior on both sides of the counter. This applies to consumers and businesses alike. Alex responds to a discount. The coffee shop responds to a tax. But how do millions of these small, separate decisions turn into the actual prices we see on the menu? That's where two of the most powerful forces in economics take over. Here's the real answer to Alex's original question. Demand is how much of something people are willing and able to buy at a given price. As the price goes up, fewer people are usually willing to buy, so demand generally slopes downward as price rises. Fewer people want a $5 coffee than a $2 one, all else being equal. Supply is how much sellers are willing and able to offer at a given price. As the price rises, sellers are usually more willing to produce and sell more, because a higher price means more potential reward. So supply generally slopes upward as price rises. Now here's where it gets interesting. The price isn't just information for the buyer. It's information for the seller too. A rising price can signal people want more of this than we're currently supplying. And that signal can attract more sellers or push existing ones to produce more. Where the amount buyers want to purchase matches the amount sellers want to offer, you get what's called equilibrium, a balance point, not a price anyone deliberately set. But markets rarely sit still, and it's important to be precise here. Prices don't snap to equilibrium instantly. If demand suddenly jumps, say a popular influencer is spotted drinking from that $5 shop, more people want coffee than the shop can supply at the old price. That's a shortage, and a shortage creates pressure for the price to rise. If instead a supplier's costs spike and they can no longer offer the same amount at the old price, that shortage pressure builds again. Reverse it, weaker demand, or more supply than buyers want, and you get a surplus, which creates pressure for the price to fall. Over time, these pressures can move a market toward a new equilibrium, though real markets are constantly being nudged by new information before they ever fully settle. That's why prices never really stop moving. They're not broken, they're reacting. But okay, why does a 10% price increase barely change how much people buy of one product while it completely wipes out demand for another? Imagine Alex's coffee shop raises prices by 10%. Alex grumbles, but keeps buying. There's no coffee shop nearby that's noticeably better or cheaper, and honestly, Alex just wants the coffee. Now imagine the same 10% increase on a specific brand of soda sitting on a shelf next to a dozen near-identical alternatives. Customers might switch brands instantly. That difference has a name: price elasticity of demand, how strongly the quantity people buy responds to a change in price. When demand barely moves despite a price change, it's called inelastic, think essential medicine, or fuel when there's genuinely no easy alternative. When demand shifts dramatically, it's called elastic, think restaurant meals, or branded products competing against near-identical substitutes. Three things usually decide which category something falls into: how many substitutes are available, whether it's a necessity or a luxury, and how much time buyers have to adjust. Give Alex enough time, and even a favorite coffee shop can start to feel replaceable. Demand tends to become more elastic the longer people have to find alternatives. This matters enormously for revenue, and it's worth being precise. When demand is sufficiently inelastic, the percentage drop in how much people buy can be smaller than the percentage price increase, meaning total revenue may actually rise. But when demand is elastic, that same price increase can cause such a steep drop in sales that revenue falls instead. Raising prices doesn't automatically mean earning more. It depends entirely on how buyers respond. So how does a business even decide whether raising the price is worth the risk? Every business, including Alex's coffee shop, is quietly asking one question all day long. Should we make one more? Costs split into two kinds. Fixed costs stay the same no matter how much is produced. The shop's rent doesn't change whether they sell 10 coffees or 1,000. Variable costs rise with production. Beans, milk, and cups cost more the more coffee gets made. To decide whether to produce more, businesses compare two things. Marginal cost, the additional cost of producing one more unit, against marginal revenue, the additional revenue earned from selling that one more unit. If the extra revenue from one more coffee is higher than the extra cost of making it, producing more tends to make sense. Once marginal cost catches up with marginal revenue, expanding further stops being worth it. What's left over after covering costs is profit, and profit acts like a magnet. Wherever it shows up, other businesses tend to notice and want in. Which raises a natural question. Why doesn't Alex's coffee shop just charge $10? Because right across the street, there's another coffee shop. If Alex's usual shop charges too much, Alex simply walks somewhere else. Competition is one of the biggest reasons prices stay in check. When businesses compete for the same customers, it tends to push toward lower prices, better quality, more innovation, and better service because a business that stops improving risks losing customers to whoever's better nearby. That benefits people like Alex directly. But competition has a harder edge to inefficient businesses that can't keep up, may struggle to survive at all. Competition doesn't just reward the winners. It removes the ones who can't keep pace. But what happens when that competition disappears? Economists describe a kind of idealized extreme called perfect competition: many buyers, many sellers, nearly identical products, and easy entry or exit, where no single seller can control the price alone. It's mostly a benchmark. A model to compare reality against. Agriculture comes close in some respects, but real-world markets rarely match it perfectly. Now imagine the opposite extreme. What if Alex's coffee shop was the only one in town, no competitors close enough to matter? That's a monopoly, one firm with substantial control over a market because meaningful alternatives are limited. That control can come from high costs to enter the industry, control over a key resource, huge advantages from scale, or simply legal protection. Monopoly isn't automatically the villain of the story. A single large provider can sometimes produce more efficiently, especially in industries needing massive infrastructure, like power grids. But without competitive pressure, monopoly power also tends to bring higher prices, lower output, and weaker incentive to keep improving. Between these two extremes sit two structures you'll recognize immediately. Oligopoly is when a small number of large firms dominate an industry. Airlines on a busy route are a familiar, if imperfect, illustration, and here. Each major firm's decisions directly affect the other's next move. Monopolistic competition is when many firms compete but differentiate themselves through branding, quality, or experience, which is exactly what's happening with coffee shops. Alex's two shops aren't identical. One might sell atmosphere, the other sells cheap and fast. Same product category, different value. Now, what if a business's decisions don't just affect its customers, but people who never bought anything at all? Picture a factory near Alex's neighborhood. It pays for its materials, its workers, its machines, its private costs. But if it also releases pollution into the local river, that cost lands on people who were never part of the transaction. Economists call this a negative externality, a cost imposed on a third party. The opposite also happens. Someone getting vaccinated protects people around them too, a positive externality, a benefit reaching beyond the buyer. This creates a gap between private cost and social cost, or private benefit and social benefit. Left alone, a market tends to produce too much of something with a negative externality, like pollution, and too little of something with a positive one, like vaccination or education. This is what economists mean by market failure, not that markets are broken or useless, but that under certain conditions, an unregulated market may not land on the outcome that's actually best for society as a whole. Externalities are one cause, so is unchecked market power, unequal information between buyer and seller, and goods that are hard to charge for individually, like a public streetlight. If markets can sometimes produce outcomes like this, what can actually be done about it? Governments generally reach for three tools. A tax on the polluting factory can force it to account for some of that external cost, but it also raises the factory's costs, which can trickle down into higher prices for everyone. A subsidy can encourage something with positive externalities, like vaccination or clean energy, but it costs taxpayers money and can distort decisions elsewhere in the market. Regulation can protect consumers when information is unequal, like safety standards on food, but compliance costs can be passed along to consumers, and poorly designed rules can create side effects nobody intended. None of these tools are automatically good or automatically bad. Every intervention tends to solve one problem while creating a new trade-off somewhere else. That tension, not a clean, guaranteed fix, is the honest picture of how policy actually interacts with markets. Now let's put almost everything we've covered into one market Alex, and probably you, deal with constantly. Alex is now looking for an apartment. Desirable land near the city center is scarce, not because land is rare everywhere, but because the supply of well-located space is limited relative to how many people want to live there. Choosing to rent near the center instead of farther out carries a real opportunity cost in money or in commute time. Housing demand tends to be relatively inelastic. In the short run, people can't just conjure a new home overnight. So even a sharp price increase doesn't immediately reduce how many people need somewhere to live. Meanwhile, supply responds slowly, construction takes time, land is limited, and zoning rules can restrict how much new housing gets built at all. When demand keeps climbing and supply can't keep pace, that mismatch creates real, sustained pressure for prices to rise, exactly the shortage dynamic from earlier, just playing out over months and years instead of days. Governments sometimes respond with subsidies for affordable housing or with rent controls. Rent controls may genuinely reduce costs for existing tenants, but depending on how they're designed and on local market conditions. They can also reduce landlords' incentive to maintain or expand housing supply, sometimes worsening the very shortage they were meant to fix. There's no single guaranteed outcome. It depends on the details. And once you see all these forces working together, scarcity, elasticity, slow-moving supply, incentives, and policy trade-offs, housing stops looking like one simple number on a listing page. It looks like everything we just covered. Let's go back to where we started. 2 coffee shops, 2 prices, $2 and $5. Now, you can actually explain it. Scarcity means Alex's time and money are limited, so every purchase carries an opportunity cost. Utility explains why Alex might choose the pricier coffee anyway, if it's worth more to Alex personally. Incentives shape how both Alex and the shop owners behave. Supply and demand explain why the price sits where it does and why it moves. Elasticity explains how much room each shop actually has to raise prices without losing customers. Marginal thinking explains how much coffee each shop chooses to make. Competition, or the lack of it, explains why one shop can charge more than the other in the first place. And if either shop's decisions start affecting people beyond their own customers, externalities and government policy enter the picture too. None of that was ever just a price. It was scarcity, demand, supply, costs, competition, and incentives, all showing up in two small numbers on a menu board. If this video changed the way you look at prices, subscribe for more simple explanations of the economic forces hiding behind everyday life. And if you know someone who thinks economics is just graphs and equations, send this their way.